right, we will continue with question 9. Members of the public rely on the zoning codes, land use, corridor plans, and development standards when engaged in zoning cases that impact their neighborhoods. In some cases, the Board of Commissioners will override portions of zoning code and the future land use development standards. If elected, will you pledge to curtail these seemingly arbitrary practices? Mr. Savage.
Yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, I would. You know, if you're an ordinary human being and you try to figure out what might happen where you live and you find out that you have to consult a land use plan, a corridor plan, development standards, and who knows what else, there are so many layers of things that can affect your neighborhood. It's very difficult to navigate these things and figure out what's coming. Like I said before, the whole thing about the comprehensive plan is there's so much buried in it that you will never know for sure what might happen. And that to me is a little bit of an issue. I think the planning process should be streamlined and simplified so that you could go and find out what's in store for your neighborhood. The whole business of zoning and planning is to protect all property owners. The property owner who wants to develop his property has certain rights, but the neighbors have rights too. The whole concept of zoning protect you as a property owner from something that your neighbor might do with his property. So his rights are somewhat limited and your rights are somewhat limited because you share a property line. And you can't say that an owner can do anything he wants with his property. You cannot, otherwise there wouldn't be any zoning codes, because that's what zoning codes do, is put limitations in place. But those limitations protect the entire community.
All right. Colonel Boyce.
You know, this planning, regardless of what nature it is, kind of reminds me of my time of doing operational planning for real-world deployments. I would gather a staff, and we would, from all the services, and we'd meet on a base, and we would take a week every month for a year to develop the load plan of airplanes and ships for this operation that we were going to do. The trouble was that the general who would execute this plan was never a part of our working group. So as soon as he took over, he would change the plan. And you know what happened then. You know, it's just the Cornell effect. Once you take one pallet off an airplane, it just ripples down the whole stream of airplanes. That's why I go back to my point that I answered earlier. There's been a great deal of commitment, effort, resources put into these plans by good people. We should honor them. And we should honor them by holding them as much as possible. And my commitment is to work with the commissioners to ensure that we have all the transparency and openness that we need to bring to this process, that whenever we have a change to the plan, you know what it's about, you have plenty of notification about it, and you have a voice at the table.
Chairman Lee.
The zoning code, a future land use map, and development standards should only be modified if changing conditions warrant consideration and we can gain full majority of the board support. The zoning code, the future land use map, and development standards should only be modified if changing conditions warrant consideration and gain the approval of a majority of the board. And yes, most definitely, I will pledge to curtail any decisions that are being made arbitrarily.
Question number 10. Many local governments in Georgia and across the United States offer some type of neighborhood registry or have community councils. Why do you think that Cobb County is reluctant to officially recognize community groups and neighborhoods? Mr. Savage.
I'm sorry, was it me?
Yes, sir.
There was well, in the city of Atlanta, for example, they have the neighborhood planning units. And they are really the first stop for anybody who comes into an area that wants to do something that's going to require a new development permit or a new approach or new zoning or anything of that nature. And this is where the community itself is the screening process, and you don't even get to the zoning level if you haven't made it through the neighborhood planning unit. and they get involved in other aspects of I guess you would call micro-government for the community in which they serve. And the city is carved up into specific zones, and these are not ad hoc organizations. The officers are elected, and they have, charters that they work with, and it's all organized. And there's a city agent or city representative, I believe, that's assigned to each one of the neighborhood planning units. So they have a conduit back to headquarters, and because of that, these organizations matter. I frankly think one of the weaknesses in Cobb County is that homeowners associations, where they exist, basically focus internally. They look at their covenants and not much else, and they don't really get involved in some of the community activities that they might be affected by until it's too late in many cases. And the homeowners association just doesn't turn out to be a good mechanism for dealing with the larger issues outside of an individual subdivision. So yes, I think it's something, we only have 4 district commissioners, each one of whom represents about 170,000 people. And I would be much more interested in getting into some, what you would call, not neighborhood planning units, but that concept of local representation rather than trying to add more commissioners and making the government bigger.
Colonel Boris.
I take a different tack. I think that these kind of organizations dilute the effectiveness of the commissioners. I think if the commissioner's not doing his job or her job, and the homeowners, residents of that district are not satisfied with the effort that they're producing or the results of their effort, then they have the process called the electoral process to find somebody else. But I'm not really interested in adding another level of government that the staff has to, county staff has to respond to. I think that the commissioners have it well within their authority to use their creativity to use whatever organizations they want to within their districts to address these kind of issues, and leave it at that.
Chairman Lee.
Several years ago, under the request of my friends from the Canton Road Neighbors, I held and sponsored several series of community meetings to consider community councils. There was not, at that time, there was not enough support on a board or actually from some of the other civic organizations to move forward with that concept. However, coming out of that conversation, the board did implement a new system that give residents the ability and access to notification of all zoning simply by signing up for our newsletter and information. I am always open to receiving proposals and always supportive of community involvement in determining what we should do to move forward.
Number 11, Cobb County is experiencing tremendous growth in the business sector. How do we prevent the county from changing from a place where people want to live long-term and raise their families to a more congested area that pushes current residents to less urban counties? Mr. Savage.
I've heard figures about what percentage of Cobb County residents leave Cobb County to go to work every day, and it's higher than the number of people who commute into Cobb County for work. And that really, that fits the long-term description. It's a term that's out of vogue now, but it used to be a common term. Talk about bedroom communities, and at some point that kind of turned into almost a pejorative term, like you just weren't hip if you were a bedroom community. You need to have more going for you than that. I think we want a healthy business community. I think one of the attractive features, again, looking back over the years, one of the attractive features about Cobb County is how many people were able to come here and start a business of just about any kind imaginable and succeed with it. And that's a good thing. The entrepreneurial spirit can be very productive for the entire community. And the idea that people can have jobs that are close enough to home that they don't have to have a 2-hour commute each way, the way people do in some parts of the country. So having a vibrant business community, I think, is a critical part of having a strong community in general. But you have to think about not getting to the point where the tail wags the dog. It is a community of homes and homeowners and children and families and schools, and those are the things that people really care about, and I don't think that's ever going to go out of style. So we have to be a little bit cautious. We don't want to go forward with pursuit of just any kind of a business opportunity at the expense of the quality of life that is currently exists here in Cobb County for people who want to raise their families here.
Colonel Boris.
You know, the biggest overreach is dealt with effectively by the kind of government that our founding fathers set up, and that is the engine is the people. And whenever the people feel like that they're being treated unfairly or they have a major concern, the way they reflect this concern is through their representatives. And it just seems to be this sense that no one really cares about what you say. And when that happens, then the people get all organized and they find a way to fix that. And that's how that same public input is how we ensure that we have the kind of community that we want. Now, it's very important to remember that both sides are going to bring their best, hopefully going to bring their best fight and team to the table, because they both have vested interest in what they want. And that kind of friction produces the best results. So we want to encourage that. But the bottom line is, your government is here to provide services for you and to ensure that your rights are protected. That's their job. And businesses are out there to find a way to make a profit. Now we have to find a way to find common ground on that. We have, in many cases, at least in my district, done that. There's the Vinings Vision. There's the Powers Ferry Master Plan. I know that the South Cobb Development Authority has developed some ideas there that they're trying to go forward with. So once again, the source of all these solutions comes with the people. And when the people decide they want to be part of the process, then the other side wins. Get involved. That's how you address the issue.
Chairman Lee.
If a community is not thriving and growing, it's simply dying. We always need to be growing jobs while balancing the quality of life for our existing community and neighborhoods. We need to balance these. I am never going to apologize for growing jobs in Cobb County. In fact, 20,000 jobs. Our job growth is a focus and is focused in very certain specific areas of the county, and it does not sprawl throughout this county. With the job growth has come unprecedented transportation investment to the tune of $1.2 billion. It's imperative that we as a community work together to make sure that we're planning accurately for the future with accurate data. My candidate on the right suggests that if we continue at the rate we're going, we'll be at 1 million people, or 1 million people. Folks, subject matter experts suggest that at a most, no more than 885,000 folks, one of the slowest growths in the region by the year 2040. We're giving you information up here. I encourage you to check the facts. Thank you.
Number 12. How do you see Cobb's infrastructure and public transportation evolving in 25 years? Mr. Savage.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Savage. Yeah.
Me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, you know, the most obvious thing is the transportation infrastructure. That's the thing that has been beat around the most here in the last few years, and a lot of the discussion has focused on some kind of transit system down the Cobb Parkway corridor. One of the things that has always bothered me about that is that has never been explained or defended in terms of reducing traffic congestion anywhere. You don't see Cobb Parkway as being a real target for traffic congestion. because the idea is to use the transit system to justify more intense development in that area. I don't think that would be overall a real blessing, because every place you get more development, you get more traffic. I talked to a young man the other night who's moving from North Cobb over to Sandy Springs. He works in Sandy Springs. His commute has got to be unbearable, because with Mercedes-Benz and a big insurance company locating there, yes, they're right on top of a MARTA station, but all these new people coming in to work there aren't riding MARTA, they're driving cars, and the traffic's gotten so bad, he's decided to sell his house and move over there so he can shorten his commute. So we're going to have a travel infrastructure that's going to depend upon roads and bridges as far as we can see into the future. One of the most promising things is the plan now for the Windy Hill corridor. It's called a Boulevard Plan. I saw drawings of it 5 or 6 years ago. Croy Engineering had it set up at a town hall meeting in Smyrna. Nobody else was looking at it, and I began looking, and I thought, man, this is great. You know, it's got an elevated roadway with local roads alongside, so that the people who are passing through don't have to stop at every crossroads. Is that a bell? Is that what that was? But I think things like that in the future, along with things like the managed lanes up here next to 75.
Colonel Boyce.
Well, first of all, I'll remind everybody that most of our transportation and infrastructure money is tied up in the SPLOST funds. As I mentioned earlier, whereas before we used to pay for these out of the millage rate from property taxes, now we pay for them with a SPLOST. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I just want everybody to remind that that's fenced off money. That's to be used specifically for projects that you identified as voters. But having said that, as you look at those projects, it puts a huge limitation on the kind of use of our discretionary funds in the county budget that we can be used for transportation and other infrastructure. The bottom line is the roadways and infrastructure for this county are mapped out for them till 2021. So, faced with those limitations, I've only got a couple options. First of all, I think that as much as we physically possible, is we should look at those intersections where we can add additional turn lanes to avoid the long pileups that we have right now at some of the major intersections. The second thing we need to do, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but the bottom line is the state and federal agencies still provide a lot of funding that you paid for with your taxes, all right, and you get a return on those, to improve projects in I-20, I-75, and I-575. And specifically, I would like to work very closely with the federal government and the state to get the Third Army interchange done. I think that'll relieve a lot of the pressure for traffic on the north part of the county.
Chairman Lee.
I'm a little perplexed, but I'll move on. And my opponents don't seem to understand the current SPLOST, which I outlined before. And as I said before, there's a list in the back of the room you can get to see how that works. We work on a long-range comprehensive plan for the transportation system, and we need to identify funding before we can move forward on it, and we need to identify the priority projects based on conditions and projects and moving forward. And that's what the SPLOST enables us to do. The buckets, as we talked about earlier, enable us to be flexible to meet any changing needs that might occur as we go forward. But currently there are $1.2 billion of improvements in the works that will have a major impact on our overall infrastructure over the next 25 years. I see the Cobb continue to invest across county with a special focus on making improvements in those areas that are most congested. We will continue to invest in CCT and implement innovative solutions such as the Flex Bus, the Express buses, circulated travel, and the 10X, all introduced under my leadership in the last few years. If re-elected chairman, I will build on my successful record of working side by side with partners at the state, the CID, the city, the federal and regional levels to leverage every dollar possible of funding possible. Again, my record speaks for itself in leveraging dollars for the future transportation improvements. As when it relates to the Third Army Road interchange, I have successfully moved that project forward to the design, and now is currently in the process of having the permit extended and in the process of having the right-of-way acquisitions completed. So that project is moving forward in cooperation with the state and the federal government. Thank you.
Question 13. Do you think there is some point at which Cobb County would consider limiting the expansion of the Cumberland Improvement District boundaries? Mr. Savage?
I'm almost afraid to get into this. I have written about this and talked about it in the past. I actually remember 1984 in the general election, we had a constitutional amendment that authorized the creation of community improvement districts. And I remember looking at that on the ballot, and it said that they will be self-taxing to raise extra money to spend on extra services in their district. And I thought, well, that's so fine with me. If I don't want to go to Cumberland Mall and pay another 1% for everything I buy over there, I just won't go there anymore. And then I found out how it really worked. The constitutional amendment went on for pages, which is unusual for a constitutional amendment, but it was exquisite detail about how these things are supposed to work. And they don't work like that. They collectively, between the Town Center Area CID and the Cumberland CID, they have coughed up hundreds of thousands of dollars of their money over the years, which is raised through our tax system, by the way. And they have used that money to pay for political campaigns, to sponsor the T-SPLOST and SPLOST programs, to go out and do massive advertising to get people to vote for these things. And somebody said earlier that people voted for the SPLOST because they liked what they saw. Well, actually, they voted for the SPLOST because they liked the advertising they saw. And the CIDs made all of that possible, and I think that was wrong. They are organized by the government, they are government agencies, and they should be covered by the same ethics laws about political campaigns as this county itself. So I have a problem with their expansion, but they also have sponsored studies on things outside their areas I don't think they should do. But the biggest thing is not going to come out.
Colonel Boyce.
Well, I just want to mention a couple things about CIDs. They're not allowed to handle zoning cases. They'll still have to go before the Planning Commission and to the board. So no matter how much they draw their lines, they can't change the zoning in there. They do have a positive impact because they raise their own money. As we saw from the Cumberland CID, they do a magnificent job of beautifying their spaces. And I have to tell you that I somehow can get through the Cumberland CID area with no difficulty in my car, but I absolutely am baffled by how to get down Barrett Parkway, other than at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, look, I took a trip last year to a couple cities, Boise, Idaho, and Greenville, South Carolina, to see how their CIDs work, because I wanted to get a contrast from how ours did. And the basic fundamental is that if you have a self-taxing district and everybody in the district agrees to it, and you have the right kind of leadership, it can produce good results. But I agree with Larry. There are people in those institutions and CIDs who think that they overreach their authority. They stretch the limits of the interpretation of what a CID can or can't do. And I think that needs to be looked at very carefully.
Chairman Lee.
Well, again, I'm doing a little bit of education here first. First of all, the CID boundaries are established through their request to the Board of Commissioners, who then have to approve their boundaries. The boundaries, CIDs own no property. They cannot and will not ever submit a zoning application or a variance application. They're simple. Their purpose is to self-tax themselves through property taxes to create revenue to advance transportation-specific projects within their boundaries to improve transportation and available and flexibility of what options exist. The Cumberland CID has been in existence for 25 years. In fact, it was the first CIDs in the state of Georgia. And that may be why, since their investment has been longer and their investment is in greater numbers, why things appear to be moving faster there. But the Town Center CID has made some significant advancements in the last few years. The Skip Span Connector Bridge, which just opened this past week, is a significant plan that was brought forward by the Cumberland CID and done cooperation with GDOT, CDOT, and KSU. The South Barrett Reliever is a project about to embark on which will help relieve traffic on the south side of Barrett Parkway. And then most recently, or a few years ago, there was another roadway extended, Big Shanty was extended underneath 75 to increase east-west connectivity under East 75. These are all projects that were initiated and led by the Town Center CID in cooperation with the Cobb and the Georgia Department of Transportation. So here again, I don't think that government should tell private businesses what they can and cannot do. Property owners choose to be in the CID, and as such, they should be left to govern their own taxes. Thank you.
Number 14. The City of Marietta has placed a term limit referendum on the ballot for voters to decide this fall. What is your position on term limits, and if elected, would you support a similar referendum? Mr. Savage.
You know, I thought about that because the two things that have been going on. One is Marietta's interest in term limits, and the other one was the movement in Kennesaw where they eliminated all the health care benefits and anything other than their paycheck for the members of the city council. That has potential to be a term limiter by itself because not a lot of people can spend years on the city council and still hold down a full-time job somewhere to get benefits. So, you know, the question is how much do you do for elected officials? And I think we're a little bit too lavish. One of the things I have an eye on is if I can get elected chairman, I would be looking at trying to convert the chairman's job back to a part-time job instead of a full-time job. I don't know if it's possible today with the other commitments that go with it, but it certainly needs to be explored. Another thing I would do is move the district commissioners out of the office building in Marietta where the air is thick with tension, and move them out to county office space out in their districts where they'll be closer to the people they represent and further from the special interests. I think that would be good for everybody, and it would sort of lighten the mood for a lot of people. The other part, the term limit thing has a certain risk associated with it, and I just heard a congressman speaking today at lunch, and he talked about this entrenched bureaucracy. When you limit the terms of elected officials, and they have to be turned over, but the bureaucracy remains in place, after a while the bureaucracy starts running the show because the elected officials spend their entire time in office trying to get up to speed on how everything works. So there is a certain risk with term limits.
Colonel Boyce.
You know, term limits have plenty of examples. The presidency of the United States has term limits. The governor of the state has term limits. But I've come to see something during my last 4 months on my campaign trail. I'm struck by the fact that even though we live in a time when there's information overload and multiple sources to find out things like who your candidates are. People are busy, and local elections, many people I've talked to at the door simply have no idea what their local government does, who their board members are, who their chairman is. So they do their civic duty by going to vote. But because they're not informed, unless they hear something otherwise that gets their attention, the eye after the incumbent has a significant advantage for people. And I know the judicial candidates who are still here are probably with me saying, yeah, let's take that eye off and make it a fair fight. So I think one of the ways to ensure that we don't keep rolling over people is with term limits. But I also know that there are some drawbacks to that. So my answer is I still need to do my homework on it before I come to any decision on it. But I'm warming to the idea.
Chairman Lee.
Well, I can't believe my candidate just told you that the voters of Cobb County are uninformed. There are some folks that would suggest that the city referendum is targeted to a specific council person. But as such, they've gone through the process of putting the referendum on a ballot. And I'm generally supportive and would be willing to consider something what's similar to what Marietta has put on the ballot.
Number 15. Cobb County is one of Georgia's most populated areas, yet there are only 4 commission districts with 179,000 residents per district. If elected, would you pledge to approach the legislature to add at least 2 new commission districts in Cobb County? Mr. Savage.
I said earlier when we talked about I don't know if we had a word for it, but the lower level of involvement that would involve more homeowners at a lower level with the more the neighborhood orientation to participate in government. I think that would be a healthy thing because it would give more people access. It would give more people the opportunity to connect in some way and understand more about what's going on. Not that these things would be legislators. They wouldn't be salaried people. They wouldn't be a part of government like commissioners are, but they would actually bridge the gap much more effectively than would increasing the number of commissioners. If you went from 4 commissioners to 6 instead of 179,000 people represented by one commissioner, you might bring it down to 120,000 represented by a commissioner. You're still not going to know everybody. So I think that the way to get more engagement, more involvement, which would be very healthy to get more people at the homeowner level involved in some way in their government and get them better informed, I think it'd be more useful, more helpful to have that expansion down to the lower end.
Colonel Boyce?
No, I'm not in favor of expanding the board from 5 to 7 members.
Chairman Lee?
The answer is no. I think the board structure we have in place now works well. As we have demonstrated in the past, when we have public meetings and public information meetings, we send staff with a whole lot of information, and then that information is made available on a website. I think having the appropriate amount of staff to be available to help address individual issues of concern is the way to go. I don't think more politician is a good solution to anything.
Number 16, and the last question. As chairman, what would you like to see the county accomplish in the next 4 years? Mr. Savage?
I would like to see the county steer back into the level that we had maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and certainly back in the 80s when we had a lot more cohesive community, when people were proud to say they were from Cobb County. It was kind of a status thing because it was a great place to live, it was a great place to make a living, it was a land of opportunity, and a lot of good things were going on. Somehow we managed to build infrastructure without a SPLOST. We managed to get a lot of things done without anybody being offended by secrecy and privacy and confusion and disorientation. And it was kind of a great period, and I miss that. I don't think that has to be lost forever. I think we can get that. You have to understand that everybody's in the same boat, and whether it's a commercial entity or a private entity or a church or a nonprofit organization or whatever, we find ways to get along, and we do get along, and we can get along, and we can do it without a lot of unnecessary involvement from our government. So we will be a family and a community again, and with a government that works for us.
Colonel Boyce?
You know, being a leader of any public institution, whether of a county commission or House of Representative or Senator, comes with a great deal of responsibility and power. And a great deal of potential to do good or bad. It's not an easy job. As I say with some tongue-in-cheek, on your best day, only half the people are angry at you if you do your job right, because there are very difficult decisions you have to come to. I've said this so many times, I'm committed to this. I think people want to believe in their leaders. They do. They want to believe in their leaders. They want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And the best weapon that you bring to that is being open and transparent. So when I say things that sometimes seem to be one thing, the reality is at least I put myself out there where you can chew on it rather than hide in the shadows. So when I leave the office, I just simply want to leave knowing that the people thought that I had their best interests at heart, that I did the best that I could, and that I left this county a better place than I found it. If I can accomplish that, then I know that we've all worked together in community to achieve that goal. Because as we all know, a leader is only a good leader if he listens to the people that he leads.
Chairman Lee.
As chairman, what I'd like to see the county accomplish in the next 4 years is to build on the success of our past 5 years, ensure that the economic growth we have achieved turns into a further reduction of taxes for Cobb County homeowners. We'll eliminate the water fund transfer. I want to ensure that the complete $40 million for the Parks Bond is fully funded without raising taxes. Continue to foster redevelopment in targeted specific areas of the county. And most importantly, continue to work to strengthen our law enforcement and our anti-gang initiatives.
Thank you, gentlemen. Turn it back over to you, Carol.
Answer session, and now we will move to the closing statements, and we will begin with Mr. Savage.
From my 6 years of study of the Cobb County government, I determined that there were issues. There were a lot of things that I felt like needed to be improved, and openness and transparency was one of them. Openness and transparency is more than just a promise to be open and transparent. You have open and transparency in government when you configure your operating systems, the way you do business, the way you get things done, the way you run meetings. When those things are designed for openness and transparency, it doesn't matter if people promised or not, they're going to be open and transparent. It's more about how your systems work than it is about the individuals. And that's one of the things I think we have lacked. I don't know if it's because of just the way things evolved over the years or if it was by design, but honest to goodness, I think some of our operating systems looked like they were designed more for secrecy than for openness. Those are things that can be fixed, but if you don't fix those things, nothing's really going to change. You have to have a comprehension of what's wrong in order to fix things. If you don't understand what's wrong, then you also have very little chance of making any change that will be effective. I have a good comprehension of what's wrong because I've been invested for a long time in a lot of the things that happen around here. One of the most substantial things, obviously, has been our purchase of a baseball stadium. I went to court over the bond financing, and I don't apologize for anybody. It was not any animus about the Braves or even the stadium. It was because we had a constitutional right to vote, which means I understand why we didn't vote. I don't have to ask anybody about that. And we didn't get to vote, even though we had an election already lined up only 4 months after the announcement was made. So I went to court. I did not get the answer I wanted. I also filed 2 ethics complaints, and I stand behind both of those because those also reveal some weaknesses in our system. I understand where the issues are, I understand what our targets are, and I'll work tirelessly to get where we need to be.
As I've mentioned earlier, as your elected chairman, district commissioner, regardless of the position, we are held to a higher standard. I've said many times, you trust your minister, you trust your banker, you trust the pilot that flies your airplane, you trust your doctor. Why is it that we don't hold our elected officials to the same high standards? There should be absolutely no crack in the bond of trust between the elected officials and the public. And when that happens, then there should be grave concern by all of us, because a crack becomes bigger. Once you get away with something, then you'll do it again. I believe that's what we have now, not just here in Cobb County, but throughout the land, that there's this sense that our elected officials are not listening to us. So I could have complained about it, or I could get out and do something about it. And that's why I'm here. That's what I've been doing for 16 months. I've been getting out, talking to people, and hearing them and asking for their vote, because I am like them. I'm concerned that we're not being heard. I'm not the only one that recognizes what's going on. As you know, the Fraternal Order of Police endorsed me last month. So obviously what I've been doing with regard to my concern and support for public safety in many regards has resonated. It's time for a change. And I believe that with my background and commitment to open and transparent government, I'm more than capable and ready to give Cobb County and to live up to that motto that we live by here in this county, to expect the best. And I will give you the best every single day that I'm your chairman. I ask you for your vote. I'm Mike Boyce. Thank you.
Chairman Lee.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the Canton Road Neighbors and the Bells Ferry Civic Association for bringing this forum together. I hope you recognize the rhetoric you've heard tonight, and I hope that you take the time to research the things that are being spewed out by the candidates next to me. I'd ask them this: give me a specific example of what you're asking or alleging, and how you would do it differently. They're running against my conservative record, and I'm proud of my conservative record. And I'm proud of the accomplishments that I've made as chairman of the Cobb County. I've lowered the taxes 3 times. I've added 80 police officers. I've facilitated economic growth to the tune of 20,000 jobs, 42 relocation and expansions, and over $1 billion in private investment. But this is just the beginning. I still have work to do. I have to ensure that the economic growth that we have achieved turns into further reduction of taxes for Cobb homeowners. We want to eliminate the water fund transfer. We want to ensure that the $40 million for Parks Bond is fully funded without raising taxes. And we want to finish what we started to make Cobb the safest community in Georgia. Look, the easiest thing in the world is for a politician to be angry. But I'm not a politician, I'm a leader. I am the person who has led the board to make bold decisions and delivered conservative results. Cobb County is a shining example of where conservative leadership will take you. Today, Cobb County is better and stronger than it has ever been in history, and it is only going to get better if you re-elect me. I please ask you to consider strongly supporting me with your vote on May 24th. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, these candidates have all done very well. Many of these questions are very complex, and I would urge you to go back and review the video when it is posted online. There will be a link to YouTube. It'll be made public, and we will also try to provide a transcript of sorts. Before we conclude, we just want to give you a few words about our volunteer organizations. Bells Ferry Civic Association and Canton Road Neighbors are nonprofit civic groups involved in these community development issues on behalf of local residents. There's information about us in the lobby, as well as sign-up sheets to receive newsletters and to volunteer. And we will now adjourn for our meet and greet, and please take time to speak to the candidates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You bet. Thank you. Appreciate you coming out tonight. Thank you. Jackson, thank you. Enjoyed it. Great questions. Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure being here.